Okay, this is June 4. Or 5.
4.
June 4, 1984. Interview with Mr. DePree.
That's right.
Okay. You said you were a councilman?
Yeah.
Elected in 1942?
1942.
Okay.
3rd Ward.
3rd Ward.
Yeah.
They had the same ward system as they do now, or?
I don't know. At that time, I think so. There were 6 wards. Are there still 6 wards?
Yeah, there's still 6.
And there were 2 representatives from each ward.
No.
At that time, there were.
Okay, at that time there were.
That's right, because the city charter was changed after I left. In fact, I believe that I had something to do with instigating that change. You see, when I became mayor, the outline of the city, I mean, as far as the limits were concerned, were the same as they had been in 1880. And no change. The limits were, as far as west is concerned, to about where the old interurban tracks used to cross there at the H.J. Heinz Company, and that went south on crossed West 17th Street, and that was the city limits west. Although that area was all filled in, and the city of Holland serviced it, and as the years went by, it became increasingly served, even fire department, hospital, and there was much complaint about that they didn't participate into the costs of these plants and hospitals and so forth, and yet they had the same service as the peoples of Holland, who were contributing the major share of the support, building, and the upkeep of those institutions. And so there was much undercover complaint, and there was no city manager then either. The mayor was, well, he performed the duties that were practically the same now as are performed by the city manager.
So it was a full-time mayorship?
Well, except that I had another job, but
so it was...
It was a real chore.
Yeah.
In fact, my employer there at the Holland Chemical Company, which was outside the city, I don't know whether it's in the city now, he always had some complaints about my doing that, because it took I got a lot of telephone calls there during the day, and he didn't think that was quite right, although I don't think he wanted to complain too much, because if they were in the county and not in the city, it didn't hurt the plant much for me because I also served on the Ottawa County Board of Supervisors, so that was actually, you didn't want to kick too hard. I don't remember just when that vote was taken, which changed the city charter and provided then also for a city manager. The fact of the matter was, it was after I left, but it got its start then, and I remember Vernon Tencate was the city attorney at that time, and he did considerable work on it, and he was the first person in Holland that I told that I was leaving. I was still serving as mayor, but I had made a trip west to look over this situation. I'd been called there, and I was pretty sure that I was going to do it because it provided for considerably more income, even though I hated to leave Holland. I'd lived there for almost 25 years, and I've always liked it. But after all, you got to think of your family too, you know. It was about a 50% more in salary than I was making, so I just had to do it. And he was the first one I told, because there was a lot of work with that. And so he had said one thing, I was quite insistent that it ought to be done because of the demands upon a mayor's time, that I felt that the city had reached a size where it ought to be served by a city manager. And so, well, he said, I'll work on it if you'll promise me your unqualified support. And I said, yes, I'll promise that. Well, in view of that promise, when I decided to leave, and I'll say he was halfway through with it, I thought it would be fair that I tell him first. Well, he said, it don't make any difference now because I'm so far along with it that I think I'll just go ahead with it. I don't remember whether it passed on the first shot. If it did, it was very close. I can remember that.
So besides changing the charter, it also annexed some land.
Yes, it did. And that was also, as I recall it, though, helped more by the school, because those things grew too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Holland was always in a rather, well, unfortunate location in that the limits of the south side were 32nd Street. That, and then it became Allegan County.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this leads to a conflict. So that was why that had never been annexed into the city before. But when the school district also had to expand, so those two things, the change in the charter and the expansion of the school district, were mainly responsible for the extensions of the city limits beyond the borders that had existed since 1880.
What was the population of the city during before the change?
My recollection was that just the population of the city proper was about 18,000.
Okay, so they gained not overly much. It's only up to 25,000 now.
Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. You said you were putting in a lot of time as mayor. How many hours a week can you estimate that?
My kids used to say, I can best explain that this way, besides the interruptions during the day. My kids used to say to me, Dad, you're going to be home tonight. And I'd say, no, tomorrow night. Night after that. About the only night that I could count on being home, and I of course had church assignments, Sunday night. But otherwise, almost every night, I was tied up in meetings. And sometimes late afternoon meetings too. So that's the best I can explain it. When you want to get down to it hour-wise, I just wanted to be able to put a real good deal on it. But it was too much for a person who was also trying to make a living, let's put it that way, because as aldermen in those years, they paid $50 a year, and the mayor got $100.
For the whole year. That's increased a bit. Not much.
Not much.
Still make about 50 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. What were some of the general characteristics of Holland at the time? You know, makeup of population, employment.
Well, most of the industries at that time were home-owned. I mean, local people were in that. Like the Home Furnace Company, which was an excellent company. Later on became part of Peter Ziegler. They had a wonderful product. They weren't licensed to operate in, but as I remember, 5 states, but they still did well. Whereas the Holland Furnace was authorized in all the states and was far and away the biggest operation at that time. When I first was here, the Bushman Lane Piano Company was a big operation, and they made a very wonderful piano. It's still a premium piano if you can get hold of one second-hand. That's now the Baker Furniture. That went out of business with the advent of, well, the early years of the Depression, and then the radio became so popular, you know, that people forgot about the piano for a while. They didn't happen to buy them anymore. And so, with the operation as big as that, they couldn't make it go. And that was local interest. Walter Wayne lived in that, then a rather expansive home. I think it's still there on State Street. And as you approach the city limits, to your left there was a brown brick house. It may still be there. I would say somewhere in the vicinity of 26th or 27th. Remember? You see it?
I think it's still maybe there. I'm not sure.
Well, out here Walker Lane, and that's the lane of the Bushham Lane. Let's see what else was there here at that time. That's where the Heinz Company, of course, is still here. The sugar factory, but that over the years became sugar plant. That became less and less active. That was out on West 14th Street, and I believe those buildings are still there. It's in the vicinity of Gone Park.
And they're scheduled to be torn down.
It is. But that was quite an operation. In fact, I visited on a number of occasions, and it took 2 weeks to get the smell out of your clothes. Well, and that process was just like burnt sugar, you know. And I guess that was in the drying part of it. They had a sort of a centrifugal force machine that came out, and it looked almost like brown sugar when it first came out, and of course it would be white. But that was quite an operation. That's where the Bayview was in there. And those were the primary things. There were other smaller ones smaller outfits that would come and go. But the furniture factories, which I've mentioned to you, hope I'm not forgetting it. Oh, Bus Machine Works, that later became part of Excello Corporation. That was a pretty going concern too. That was out there in the vicinity of where the Harrington docks are. In fact, that's where the city of Holland, that steamer used to come in. There were nightly trips on across the lake. Graham and Morton docks, I guess they called them, but it was right where the Harrington outfit is. The city of Holland was both a passenger and a freight carrying boat. It was serviced also by the Interurban. The Interurban ran, when I got here in the fall of 1925, and the Interurban ran as a carrier of passengers until 1927, which, of course, the automobile beat it out. No longer any need, but I went with the Interurban many times to Grand Rapids, and it was, I think, as I remember, the round, maybe it was there one way, but it was, I think, only 80 cents. And when I was playing on the whole basketball team, when the roads would be bad and we were playing in Kalamazoo, we used to play Western at that time too, or Kalamazoo College. When the roads were bad, they would be impassable because they weren't paved. So as a team, we'd go to Grand Rapids and then transfer to the line that ran through Plainwell and Otsego and those towns, and that was also Interurban. But the Interurban tracks, they had a side track running down 8th Street, as I recall. It did go down. It came in about where the depot is. On this, let's see, it would have to be on that side because it didn't cross the tracks. And that's still a vacant lot there alongside what was a drugstore and may still be. I don't know. But and then it would go down into the swamp and then under the tracks and then work down towards Zealand, so I didn't have to cross those roads. But it also, well, I should first say it ran down 8th Street, where it made a turn, passenger-wise anyway, at the corner of River and 8th, and then it ran to 13th Street, where it made a turn, and ran all the way to approximately St. Louis, what was then known as the St. Louis Sugar Factory. And that's why when my reference to you for the city limits on the west end, I said when it crossed the Interurban tracks, because that was right in front of, right there on West 16th Street before you got to H.G. Hines. But they had that spur going to the Graham Morton docks because they brought in freight from Grand Rapids and so forth too, and shipped it by boat to Chicago. It was an overnight trip. Would come back the next day here. So that all went out, though. And the city of Holland was a side wheeler. In other words, the rotating machine that propelled the boat on each side, something like a Mississippi River boat, except that the Mississippi boats were in the back, paddle wheel type of thing. The fact of the matter is, the son of the president of the furnace company, A.H. Landler, and 3 other people, his cousin, something like 14 years old, and a fellow known as Earl Letty and John Ernst, who was employed by the furnace company. They were riding in Paul's speedboat, Paul Landers, and he was a kind of a daredevil sort of a guy in a way. He would go when the city of Holland comes to where in order to be playful, he'd run that speedboat towards the boat, towards the big boat, and then swerve off, you see. One time he got too close, and he went right into the side wheeler and killed all of them, 4 of them. I was writing as a part-time duty at that time. I was writing for the Grand Rapids Press, but I was also working, and I know I spent a miserable night because, in the first place, I didn't know about this thing, and at the time, and meanwhile the Grand Rapids Press is trying to get a hold of me to go to work on that thing, because as you can imagine, it created a lot of excitement. That happened in that bay there where Con DePree had built a house. It was my father's cousin, and was with that DePree company. That was one of the big industries at that time, chemical. That's where his house was, and that's the house that this fellow with the Amway Corporation had taken down. There was quite a spread in the paper about it, you know.
Yeah.
It was right off in that bay there. That's where it actually happened. So that was in 1927. So that's the history of that boat stuff.
Okay. What was the downtown like during this period of time?
It was brick pavement when I first came. And of course it's much improved now. There's been a lot of facelifting and whatnot. That whole west side of River Avenue from 8th Street to 9th Street, except for that building on the corner, and it's still there. The rest of those buildings up to the Brower Furniture Company, which that building has been torn down, I see too, and I believe is there a financial institution located in that?
Yeah, I think there is.
Otherwise, all those buildings were wood. I was in Holland the other day, and I believe they're all brick now. And then the west side as well, that was, they weren't the finest looking buildings in the world. They've been improved. On the corner across the street, that was, that's down to, there was a 2-story building there, known as the Wolverine Garage, and up above it, a relative of mine, Ed DePree, and John Van Zern, he was the donator of that Van Zern library. They had started what they call, I think they called it chemical specialties concern. It's minor stuff, you know. Later on, they built this plant museum, which then they later on, and is still there, which they sold to Miles Laboratory. And I think that was the basis for John Van Zern being able, I'm guessing, but I think that was the basis for him being able to make that large donation for the Van Zern Library there at Oak Village. Because from that little acorn, a big tree grew, you see, and he was in on it because I cashed his check many times. It was a pittance those days, but he made well after the company went down. And that same thing was pretty much true of, well, for instance, with the People's State Bank. My wife's mother was in a deal that she owned part of that property. Those were wooden structures in there. People's State Bank was across the street where Aristorst has that, I think he called it a smoke shop. That was the People's State Bank. I noticed too that as you go east from that approximate location on the north side of the street, that's pretty well filled in all the way to the corner of College and 8th, whereas there were some blank spaces in there. There was also a blank space. space and a theater located just east of what I would still call the First State Bank, but I think they call it First of America now. Maybe
Mhm.
it became the National. There was a Strand Theater in there too, where we used to go on Saturday afternoon. Would have cowboy shows and whatnot, you know. And then there was also a vacant lot in there. I don't. There's what appears to be a kind of a vacant lot, but it's got a brick installation in it.
Yeah.
What that is, I don't know.
It's a parking lot there.
I
now.
see. I see.
Mhm.
What was the model drugstore has changed a lot. There used to be businesses in the back of it, and maybe there are. Well, Holland just generally, it has changed quite a bit, I'll tell you. Even that, we used to call it the hitching post, that restaurant I don't know if it's a restaurant, but an eating place, and it was just across the street from the post office west. We used to call that the hitching post, and it was just like an interurban car.
Mhm.
It isn't that way now anymore. There have been changes in the churches, of course. I think some of it through fires, but the Methodist church there,
Mhm.
that's a brand new building since I lived here.
That had burned.
Yeah, and then Oak Church has renovated there a
Mhm.
lot. Third Church hasn't renovated all that much since I left because, although some was done, I know, but when I was still active there before I moved away, we were already doing some of that work there. I haven't gotten around enough in the outlying districts to notice all that much change, but there's certainly, definitely been a change. And when I was in the council too, one of the last things that we were very active in, we saw this trend towards these malls and so forth. And in order to protect downtown business, our group was the one that led to this buying of all these lots back of the stores on 8th Street so that we could provide parking. Our idea first was that we could finance with parking meters because parking became a real premium. And we had angle parking and then we had parallel parking and because that was the easiest for traffic flow. But gosh, it cut down on your parking spaces. Well, that all was a trend which would lead to malls. And we had a little inkling of that because already there was a mini-type mall built on, and it's still there. I think it's on 18th Street and in that vicinity of Monroe Avenue, you know, that you people just accept that because it's there. But it wasn't there when I first was in Holland. And I think the Fabianos, Charlie and Patsy, who had restaurants, Charlie on River Avenue, just south of that corner towards between 8th and 9th on the west side. And Patsy on the south side of 8th Street. I was walking along there the other day, there's been changes in those fronts. The IANO still shows on tile. That's from Fabiano. That's where Charlie or Patsy had a place there, and he had a big family. And of course, that was their secret in those days. Those Italian families, they'd have big families, and those kids would all work in the establishment for next to nothing. And that all went into the family fortune. Well, it was easier for them to build up a great business, you know, with that kind of a deal. But they had a fine place. Well, they had some money, I'll be honest. They were the ones that owned that property or bought up that property and started that Monroe Avenue Square or something like that, I believe they called it. Maybe they don't do that anymore, I don't know. I thought they called it that.
There's a Washington Square
That's
between,
what it is.
yeah,
That's
between
right.
18th and 19th.
That's right. That was built.
That was built about what year, do you know?
I was trying to think. I have to put it in rather. I arrived in the fall of 1925. I wasn't there, and I would say probably within that next 8 years. But then, you could see there weren't the malls then yet, but we could see the tendency.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to protect the downtown area. So we thought the only way to do it is to buy those properties, install parking meters, and the parking meters would help the city get its money back for the investment in the property and the upkeep of the property too. So other than Dykstra's funeral parlor and a few other scattering more Dykstra's, that was kind of impossible for them in those days to sell that out. So that's why all those things have parking meters there.
Hmm.
And Bill Mengs, I remember, was on the I had made him chairman of the Public Safety Commission. And that all I had to do with that. And Merle Swaff, who was dead now. I don't know whether Bill was dead or not. He used to run a gas station on the corner of the 16th and Irvine Standard Station there. That was his. And Bill was a good councilman. John Beltman, I don't know whether John Beltman is still alive. Ray, again, I forget, he was a teacher in the Christian school. He was a good memory too. Harry Harrington, who's dead, he succeeded me as mayor.
How many council members were there? You said 2 from each ward?
Two of each ward, there were 12.
Okay, so there were 12 plus the mayor?
Plus the mayor, yeah.
Okay.
The mayor had no vote except in the case of tie.
Hmm.
Something like the Vice President of the United States and the Senate. Because I was, I think, called upon once or twice to do cast my vote.
And then the council, you attended the council meetings though?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And you ran?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, how often were they? We meet about...
I was trying to remember.
First and third Wednesday are regular meetings, and then the other Wednesdays now are study sessions.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether we had study sessions, but we used to have special sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Matters of importance come up because I know that first, I was mayor and then I was a member of council. I didn't always bother about saying to it that everybody knew about it, and the Sentinel kind of started to raise a smell about that because they called those secret meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whether there already was a law, state law against that, or whether that kind of led to the adoption or enactment of such a law, that you couldn't have it because they felt they were trying to be called meetings. So after that, we were always sure that we did that too. But I believe that's right. I think we met twice a month. Always, it seems to me it was always on Wednesday night.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those sessions would last a long time, and sometimes they were rather short. And then such other meetings as might be called by the mayor. The mayor usually called all the meetings. That is a special meeting. But we've had them in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And when such hearings as the Corps of Engineers in connection with the dragging of the lake and so forth would come up, the mayor always had to take charge of those meetings. Because I remember that in that one of the first things I had to do was I was approached by the Board of Engineers when a series of meetings here in connection with the dredging of the lake, all the way from the channel, all the way up to Holland. Actually, the city dump used to be on the corner of 8th and Wren, and 8th and Wren to 7th. That whole little area in there, when I first was in Holland, that was a dumping ground, the city dump. Well, you can imagine rats, more in there. So I can remember being downtown after the interurban tracks were taken up, and just walking down the street and seeing the rats running across that where the bricks had been removed, waiting for the final, to lay down concrete base. And they could just run back and forth. And I don't know if that's so bad now. The rat problem then was quite a severe thing. That was one thing why they abandoned that as an epidemic. Too close to town.
Along with council members, there are two from each ward. Were they elected just from their ward?
That's right.
Okay. And you were elected at large by the whole city?
No,
as mayor?
No, no, as mayor, that's right. The mayor was elected at large, and so was the treasurer, is there still city auditor, isn't there?
Yeah.
Auditor, and the assessor.
So those were all elected positions instead
right.
of regular bureaucratic positions.
That's right.
Was there more responsibility then as a council member to do quite a bit of the work because there wasn't a city manager or?
Oh yes, yeah. Primarily the final decisions and the quick decisions all depended upon the mayor. But you had, the mayor was responsible for the appointment of all the members to these various committees. I suspect you still have that, Ways and Means and Claims and Accounts.
Okay, we don't have either of those committees, at least with those names.
And Public Safety. It seems to me there were about a half dozen committees, and actually the men would be very anxious to be on those committees, because sometimes that's where your major work was done, because the actions of the council depended upon what these committees were able to find out in their individual searchings on it, you see. And they couldn't arbitrarily put in to effect what they deemed best. That had to be council action. But there was quite a bit of it, depending on which of those committees you were on. The Ways and Means, for instance, they were responsible for the adoption of the budget along with the mayor. He always served on all those committees. Then the Claims and Accounts, those worked out of the city clerk's office. That was another office that was elected as city clerk. And I was in there. There was a fellow by the name of Oscar Peterson. He was the city clerk. Those fellows did their duties clear beyond the call of duty. Jiggs Item, the city engineer. Gosh, if it wouldn't have been for fellows like that, how they got along without a city manager all those years is more than I could figure. And those were one of the reasons why I just felt that there had to be a change in the city charter.
These other elected positions besides the council and the mayor, were they full-time?
You mean clerk and treasurer? All full-time.
All full-time.
Yeah, all full-time. The fact of the matter is, I don't believe that Jiggs Item, a city engineer, I don't think that was an elected, but he held office, I think, at the pleasure of the council. I'm not sure on that, but of course you were never going to get rid of a guy like that who did so well.
Was there a planning commission at all? Planning committee for? We've got a planning commission now.
Yes. I believe that was started during the time that I was on the council, because I think that Neil Vandermeulen was one of the original members of that planning commission. I know in connection with the 100th anniversary, I was on that. They called that the Centennial Commission. That commission was active for several years, from about 1945 maybe through 1948, in the planning of the centennial celebration that Holland had 100 years after its founding. That was in 1948. Bill Wickers was very active on that too. He was on that planning commission. That was a pretty good sized one. And Bastian Krutoff, who was later on, well, he had been minister, I think, who was at that time, was the minister of First Church. And then later on was with the, I think was the college pastor, or did he serve at the seminary? I can't remember. But he was on that commission, I remember. And Grand Rapids cooperated with us very well because part of our celebration entailed coming here to Grand Rapids where an arrangement was made for KLM to land a big plane. And not a jet, because they didn't have jets in those days, on which were some immigrants, illustrating the difference in the arrival of the Dutchmen to this part of western Michigan in 1948 as compared to the way they formerly came by sailing vessel to New York and through various rivers and whatnot to get here. So that was quite an event. So that, I believe that was about the time that the Planning Commission came in.
Well, it's just starting. They weren't doing major studies on how the city should grow.
That's right. That's right. That's where it started.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, I think at that time that they also started this idea that you could contribute, to leave in your will money for the city. I don't know if they still have that or not.
I don't know. I don't think we've gotten many contributions.
No.
Like that.
Probably not.
not through wills, through other ways, but
I think they did have that. Because there's such things as the hospital. And I know that that was always, the hospital was built originally with funds that you see, the Board of Public Works had 50% of that utilities profits were to go to the city. And increasingly over the years, those men that served on that utility, they didn't like that because, well, they had to expand too. And when originally you see that their main generation plant was on 6th Street, right where the college used to play football before they went to 16th Street or to Fairbanks Avenue in the stadium. There was a big plant with a great big chimney, I remember. That was their first plant. Well, then they had to have this undertaking to increase their output, and so they moved over to Lakeshore. And that was done while I was here. And I remember Joe Gears was the chairman of the board, and he and the council and myself, we had a lot of arguments about that 50% share, because he said they needed it for their expansion of their plant, and we said we needed it for the taxpayers of Holland, because that was the agreement. That's how they had their license to operate, and we didn't tax them, so it was only fair to get that. But there was some awful rhubarbs about that. But there were fellows like that. I don't know whether you have that anymore, but public-spirited men who devoted an awful lot of time to the welfare of the city and didn't get paid for it.
We've got some of the family corporations now, which have expanded into multi-million-dollar corporations, are some of those men are putting money into the city. We're getting a new senior citizen center.
Oh yes.
Ed Prince is doing that, contributing half of the money with a $2 million complex. There's some other things happening.
He's the fellow that has that new plant out there, and that was that happened after I left here, when they developed that whole south end. What do they call it? Allen Industrial Park? Is that what they call it?
Yes.
I used to hunt there with my dog. That was a good hunting place, a good place to run your dog.
Was the hospital city-run?
Yes, it was. Run by the city, and it was built, that's what I started to say. The original hospital was built funds from the Board of Public Works.
Okay.
Then its first expansion, it was necessary to expand it, and that, of course, was one of the side events that really led to the change in the charter, because here we had to expand the capacity of the hospital. The first hospital, when I got to I was going to say Seattle, but it's Holland, was located where the Netherlands Museum is.
That's right. Okay.
That was the hospital. And then they had that annex in the back too. I think that's kind of served as emergency.
Hmm.
Well, I believe that new hospital was, I believe it was built in 1929, which is the year I graduated from college. And along in the 40s, then, it was necessary to expand, and primarily, not that Holland, population-wise, had grown so much itself, but the area around it had, and they had to be served, and they paid the same rate as the patients from the city of Holland, and that was the extent of their contribution to the hospital. Whereas the taxpayers, we always appropriated, we had a certain sum for the operation of the hospital, and that was spread on the tax rolls. And so there was a lot of feeling that that wasn't kosher, that they should be part of it too if it was necessary to expand. But it had to be expanded, and I know I think I was on the Claims and Accounts, and I don't believe I was mayor yet. But I know Oscar Peterson said to me, well, we have some reserve funds. And I said, well, Oscar, you think we can afford that? I mean, to pay the reserve funds to, although this is an emergent condition. Well, he said, I think so. So I said, well, let's push it, let's get it done. So that first expansion was out of those funds. Again, really from, you might say, indirectly from funds that were there primarily because of the city's entitlement to 50% of the profits of the Board of Public Works. And to equalize, and then the further thing was, of course, that then that ultimately led to the changing of the city's limits and everything else. But it was always city run. So how about it now? I noticed that there's a sanitary service here in town. That used to be a thing that we struggled with so much. Does the city furnish that? Is that
Not yet.
individual?
It's private corporation. Right now we're looking into we've got several services, 3 or 4 that operate within the city.
Yeah.
We're thinking of bidding it out and having one city service cover the whole city,
That's what happened at CI.
and put in what are they called?
Place where you can burn the stuff and mean
No,
disposal.
no, it's jeez. Recycling.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh,
That's
yeah.
it. They tried an experiment with recycling in a few neighborhoods, and it went over halfway decently. So that would be part of the bid service and such.
Nobody likes to have a garbage unit or dump near
No.
their place.
No, there's some outside the city, and we're getting a private corporation to do this through the city. We could save money for the taxpayers, but that's coming up.
You even run into problems. I know that's true in Seattle. You even run into problems when you let it out to bids. There's some of these guys that make fortunes out of that, after they're having the garbage disposal rights to the city, all on bid. But in Seattle now,
Okay.
where I first lived in Seattle, I still live there, however, was in the county at that time. And our garbage cost us $1.15 a month. Unlimited. Didn't make any difference how many cans you had. Well, that was a handy thing because of course, even then they didn't like to have you burned. But everybody's always got a lot of shrubbery which can be cut, and they have this stuff to monkey around with. And maybe that's only once a year that you have it, but I have a English laurel hedge around half my place, for instance. And when I get through cutting that each year, I have 18 bags alone of that. Anyway, it just got less and less and less, and the price kept going up and up and up. Now for one can and one bag, I'm charged, I think it's $8.95 a month. If I get 2 cans, which I do in the summertime, and then I have 2 bags then too, You're always allowed it to one bag with one can.
Mm-hmm.
Then it jumps to $12 a month.
Now it's city run, you said?
But it's out on bid.
Out on bids.
See? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And one company has it. And then they come around only once a week.
Mm-hmm.
We get it done. I think it's on Tuesdays, and they happen to come to our place every, and I can hear that thing. Great big truck.
That woke me today.
They did, and they grind it in,
Uh-huh.
you see. And they come right down our alley. A lot of that. That was another thing we used to fuss around a lot. Well, alleys. People want to close up in Seattle or in Hollywood. But in Seattle, our alleys, most places.
How many alleys were there in Holland? We still got a few, like between 19th and 18th.
Yeah, that's where most of them were when I was there.
And that still runs quite a ways. But
Yeah.
other than that,
It was always closed.
Huh.
Closed.
I don't think they.
I don't know why either. But,
Mhm.
I think probably because they were junky. People weren't very careful. And then, of course, that would again encourage rats.
Yes.
So maybe that's the reason. But I always kind of fought to keep houses open.
Mhm.
That I hated to close streets, didn't I? But, we had an awful fuss there at the time of the Christian high school on the south end there that they wanted to close that. And I think it finally lost. And now I believe that building has been, aren't they going to make a senior citizens?
Yeah, that's where the
center?
senior
Yeah.
citizen centers. What effect did World War II have on Holland? With people leaving, and were there air raid drills and such
Oh,
like
yes.
that?
Oh, yeah. There were, in fact, they had those committees.
Another
I
committee.
was on one. Yeah, and they were furnished with gas masks and hard hats. And periodically you'd have a drill. Everybody was supposed to be off. This was at night, of course,
Mhm.
usually. Had to be, all the lights in the houses had to be doused. And members of the patrols would go out to see that there was compliance with that. It was almost mandatory. But the people cooperated very well. And I remember I lived on 13th Street at that time, right in the vicinity there where those new buildings have been built between Central and College Avenue,
Mhm.
south side of the street there. Ticey, I guess.
Yes, I just put those up.
I didn't remember those houses. That was an old house. Gladys's father had bought. The days gone by. Yeah, we were talking about the war. Now, I can only speak of how it was at our plant. At that time, we were right across from Chris-Craft. Well, Chris-Craft wasn't there, but Chris-Craft was built. And they built those landing boats there, those landing barges, one of the types anyway. And then they would drag them across to Lake St. Clair, which would be put in the water. And I think they built 3 a day. Of course, that was a lot of employment there. Now, as far as our plant is concerned, we had 75 people. But when labor became so scarce, we finally got down to where there were only 30. That's a drop of 40.
Because they were all going off.
That's right. You couldn't get replacements.
Mm-hmm.
And that even affected our office. So much so that I had to do much of the manual work that ordinarily a man in my position wouldn't have to do.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter was that plant burned, and I had been there till 2 o'clock that morning, working on getting the payroll out. By 6 o'clock, I was called at home, and my boss said, the president of the company said, "You better get over here, our plant's on fire." And so I did, because I often thought, why didn't I see that fire? We had a night crew working, and it was on. I had to go right past that. Taylor Pruitt, I think, occupies that spot there now. Anyway, I had to go right by that, and if we had a drying plant there, and it was theorized we had had a man in there to increase our capacity to dry. And what he did was increase the speed of the drying machinery. And that involved a lot of pulleys and generators and so forth. And it was theorized that that speed up caused those things to overheat, and that's what started the fire. But that was how low it was at our place. And I have to believe that that probably was true at the other plants around town too, that they had a terrible time getting enough people to do it. Of course, you could apply for a hearing. Somebody was extremely valuable to your place. You could apply for a hearing that he might be deferred for a while. And in some cases that was done, people had, from a defense angle, if your industry was necessary, you could get them deferred. Now, we had a defense argument, thank you guys, because we made a zinc preparation as well as a molybdate orange preparation, which was painted on anything made of steel as a rust inhibitor. So those of our people that were engaged in that particular operation, we had better luck getting those people deferred than others. Now I suspect that that same thing was true all the way around. It changed things. It changed things immeasurably. Now, automobiles, for instance, you couldn't buy a new automobile. Although General Motors had some cars in reserve that had been built the last year that they were in production, which I believe was 1939, maybe it was more. Because I made one trip to Pontiac, Michigan, when I was a member of the council, and I was on the Public Safety Commission, because we had to get 2 or 3 new police automobiles, others were just worn out. And the only thing we could get were Pontiacs. They had enough stock of those so that we could get them. And in order to cut down on the expense of drive back and so forth, we went there to get them, and I believe I drove one of them back from Pontiac. They weren't the fastest cars in the world. We wouldn't say they were typically good police cars in order to give chase, but at least we got them. And it was because they just simply weren't making any automobiles. Everything automobiles for, it used to be 6-7 years, there was just all defense production. Tanks and airplanes, parts of airplanes, you know. So that's the way that was. And there were a lot of people from Holland that went to the eastern part of the state, not necessarily permanently to reside, but to work in defense plants. So from that angle of it, yes, I'm temporarily lost some people, but it's a major part of the week, because I can recall a fellow coming into the People's State Bank when I was there, and I was there till 43, and he had a check for $90, and he was working in Pontiac. Well, at that time, a check, average check for a person in Holland was maybe around 25 or 30, maybe as high as $35. So I said to this fellow, man, you got the road by the tail, $90. He says, that's true. There's quite a difference between Holland and Pontiac. But he said, I have found that as far as the cost of living is concerned, I'm really no further ahead, because my cost of living there is just that much higher too. So I always remembered that the answer really isn't in how much you're making, but what you can buy with what you get.
You had mentioned the Sentinel before with your meetings. What kind of effect did they or any of the radio stations have on council dealings, with editorials or letters to the editor?
You mean whether it influenced us?
Yeah, influenced or any direct?
I don't think really. Of course, the radio station That was, I don't know when it was organized, but that wasn't years, very many years while I was still there. That came in during that time, all right. And really, the only real influence, editorial-wise and so forth, was the Sentinel. And they controlled both the city news and which was the once-a-week paper. I don't know if they still have that or not.
No, they don't have that anymore.
Well, you see, the Sentinel building when I first came in here was a building about halfway down the block between 8th and 7th Street on River Avenue. It was a two-story building, but small. And that later on became the News Publishing Company. A fellow by the name of Mulder, whose daughter, Jeanette, lived with Meta Ross, who just died. She's a daughter of the fellow that published the Holland City News. But when and his brother Arnold, I believe, was with Western State College, but he was a poet, or he was an author, Arnold was. So that was kind of down there behind him. And then Mulder was the City News. And then when he died, then the Sentinel took over. So, and by the time I was in the council, Ben Mulder was no longer around. I think it was Ben. So that really the only one that we had to worry about, and I can't say that we worried much about him, was the Sentinel. Of course, at that time, that was before after Bill Butler got there, and he's dead now. I understand. Bill was kind of a bulldog, all right. He was the son-in-law of the fellow that owned the paper, French. And French was more of a reticent type of person. And he got to be pretty old. In fact, I tell this story now because it was so funny, really. He was always not making fun of, but making much of A.H. Meyer and James A. Brower, who were still active in business. A.H. Meyer had the music store, and Brower had the furniture store, and they used to be partners up until about the turn of the century. And then one of them went into the music end of it, and the other one stayed with the furniture. Well, he would write various times, whenever he'd write about them, that he'd always mention their ages, those aged men, 94, 93, 95. Gosh, French dies in Florida, and he's 98. He was older than either one, but nobody ever knew it. But that was the way he was. He was very quiet, so I don't think that any council really worried much about the Sentinel even until Butler became more or less took over the active management of it. And he did express his opinions, and around town would create little disturbances, you know, about what does council mean with this, what are they doing with that, anything to arouse the people. And I know as far as I personally was concerned, I never really worried about that. I always did what I thought was the thing to do, and to heck with them. Let them have their own ideas. I'm sure that wasn't true at all. That's because I had a fellow sitting next to me at the board who was very conscious of the unions. The unions formerly had not been too strong here, but I think that started with the war too. And I know when we'd be appointing different people to like playground commission, we've had other appointments, you know, for the lesser jobs, he'd say to me, we've got to appoint some people representing labor. And I said, on the playground commission? I don't even know if they're representing business or who they're representing. I want the guy in there who I think will do a good job, regardless of what he is. But you see, now, he probably might have been influenced by what he read in the paper too. So maybe some of them were influenced by that, but I never knew it. They were.
What were just a few of the major issues that you had to tackle as a council member and mayor? Remember any of those? besides the ones you've mentioned?
Well, one of them was, I would consider it major, because we even had a strike that lasted less than 24 hours, but that was the first thing. That's such a thing I think it ever happened in the city. And that was labor relations when that got to be a factor. That was one. And of course, working towards changing the city charter. That I felt was a major complication. This business about buying property by the city in order to, we didn't say so, but in order to forestall the building of malls outside the city, thereby detracting from the people on A Street, protection, trying to protect our own people. There was a water problem that came up in my early years, and we used to get all of our water from wells until that proved to be inadequate. And that led then finally to getting it from Lake Michigan. That was quite an undertaking. Of course, we were only indirectly involved in that really because that was a Board of Public Works project. Well, we ran into increasingly as costs went up, we tried to, always hold it down, tried to adopt a conservative budget. And as I remember, when we were talking about the budget for the next year, it seems to me that I attended meetings almost every night for almost a month, and I suppose that was because not only after I became mayor, but even before, because I was a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and Ways and Means just meant what it said. In other ways, ways and means of raising the money in order to pay the bills. So that was a problem, and I know that finally led to where the Howland Furnace Company, which was the major industry, they felt that they were being abused and paid too much. So they said, they finally said, would you object if would you accept, if we pay for the cost, an outside person to come in and make a survey of the whole city to ascertain whether the taxes are being properly levied? And I said, no, if you want to pay the bill, we'll take it. And the joke of that was, at that time anyway, it was found that we weren't assessing them enough. But they were perfectly satisfied after that. I remember I was always on that Board of Review. That year, I don't believe that we had a half a dozen complaints. Whereas otherwise we'd meet all day and just one person after another would be coming in there, see, but they were satisfied then when after that outside person came in and reviewed it. So that was, I think I'd have to